The Iranian regime has sentenced British Iranian charity worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe to a further 1-year jail term for spreading propaganda against the regime. She had just completed a 5-year sentence on spying charges.
We'll be working very hard to secure her release from Iran, her ability to return to her family here in the UK, just as we work for all our dual national cases in Iran.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson commented on the matter today while visiting a sports equipment supplier in Wales, saying it's wrong that she's there in the first place. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said her additional 1-year jail term is totally inhumane and wholly unjustified. Her lawyer says that she's received the sentence for participating in a protest in front of the Iranian embassy in London 12 years ago. And in other news, Turkey protested after the Biden administration called the 1915 massacres of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire a genocide. The move is seen as further straining the NATO allies' relations. Turkey said there will be a response.
US President Joe Biden formally recognized on the weekend that the killing of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire constitutes genocide. It's a break with decades of diplomacy on how to call the deportations, massacres and death marches that began in 1915. Historians estimate 1.5 million Armenians died. Turkey protested by summoning the US ambassador. Turkey's presidential spokesman on Sunday called the decision extremely wrong.
It will not be easy. Of course, now everything that we conduct with the United States will be under the spell of this very unfortunate statement.
He said there will be a response without giving details. One option could be for Ankara to restrict US access to the Incirlik air base in southern Turkey. The American military uses the base for the fight against the ISIS terrorist group. The designation comes as Turkish-American relations suffer from a host of issues. But from California to Armenia to Lebanon, Armenians worldwide celebrated the move. This Beirut-based NGO director calls it a momentous decision.
It gives an incredible energy, it gives an incredible boost to the global Armenian community that has been working for decades to make this recognition a reality. But also it sets precedents, because now there are avenues that we as Armenians can take to make sure that there be retribution and compensation.
Turkey says US officials told them the declaration is not legally binding and won't help with potential claims of reparations. For decades, measures recognizing the killings as genocide stalled over concerns about relations with Turkey. Turkey rejects the use of the word genocide.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said on Sunday that Americans who have been vaccinated against the CCP virus should be able to travel to Europe by summer, easing existing travel restrictions.
The European Union plans to open its doors to Americans who have been vaccinated by this summer. That's according to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on Sunday. She told the New York Times the Union's 27 members would accept unconditionally all those who are vaccinated with vaccines that are approved by the European Medicines Agency. Von der Leyen did not say when exactly travel could resume, but mentioned the agency has approved all 3 vaccines used in the US. It's been over a year since the EU largely shut down non-essential travel. Earlier this month, the EU agreed to launch vaccination travel passes to make travel easier for people who have been vaccinated, recovered from infection or tested negative. Also on Sunday, the EU's Vaccine Task Force chief said they were confident they will be able to produce enough vaccines to achieve its target for immunity of its adult population by the middle of July.
President Joe Biden will travel to Europe this June for the G7 summit in Cornwall and a NATO summit in Belgium. It will be his first foreign trip as US president.
According to the White House, President Biden will attend the G7 summit in Cornwall, UK, from June 11th to 13th. Then he'll travel to Belgium for a NATO summit on June 14th. While in Brussels, Biden will also participate in the US-EU summit.
This trip will highlight his commitment to restoring our alliances, to revitalizing the transatlantic relationship, and working in close cooperation with our allies and multilateral partners to address global challenges and better secure America's interests.
Biden's trip comes at a time when global leaders are still struggling with the CCP virus pandemic and economic recovery. At the same time, the U.S. and its allies are facing some common security challenges. In a statement by NATO's Secretary General on Thursday, the NATO summit will focus on security challenges such as Russia's aggressive actions, the threat of terrorism, emerging and disruptive technologies, and the rise of China. Former Director of U.S. National Intelligence John Ratcliffe said that some European countries are still trying to navigate between the U.S. and China, not willing to get into direct conflict with either side on some important issues.
They need to be closely aligned with the United States and why they can't compete with China. They're not big enough to compete with China on some of the platforms, for instance, with regard to artificial intelligence and other things. And so those are partnerships that have to get better, and we need to work more closely as we address the threats around the world.
Experts see this trip as a test of Biden's ability to work with allies and meet the challenges China and Russia pose.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Is Russia an ally or an enemy of Beijing? The US has a growing strategic interest in this question. An analyst dissects the issue for us. NTD's Penny Zhou has the details.
In a recent interview with Fox News, former President Donald Trump said the U.S. should try to get along with Russia instead of forcing Russia to partner up with communist China.
The worst thing you could do is put China and Russia together, and they're together, and they get forced together.
The comment came as Russia's military buildup in Crimea alerted the West. Meanwhile, the CCP is sending record number of bombers and fighters into Taiwan's air defense zone. An analyst says if the U.S. doesn't want to fight an extremely difficult two-front war, it needs to figure out a strategy, and Trump's comment reflects an important strategic judgment.
The relationship between China and Russia has always had an appearance of unity. They are divided at heart.
He notes the ideological differences, distrust, and previous territorial disputes between Russia and China. And during the U.S.-China trade war, Russian leader Vladimir Putin publicly declared he won't choose a side. He cited a Chinese proverb, "When tigers fight in the valley, the smart monkey sits aside and waits to see who wins."
If the U.S. can remedy its relationship with Russia, it will be a powerful tool to counter the Chinese Communist Party and isolate it. But if the administration puts harsh sanctions on Russia, it will unavoidably push Russia to the side of Beijing and tie the two together. The U.S. would be creating an enemy for itself.
Tang says the threats posed by Russia and the Chinese regime are also different.
Russia is definitely not a democracy, but so far we haven't seen it trying to expand and export its ideology or try to challenge the world order. It does not have the motivation, nor does it have the ability.
Russia's economy is not doing so well. Its national GDP roughly equals that of just one province in China, while China's GDP is second only to the U.S.
No matter how tough Russia is, it won't lose its senses and actively attack NATO and start a world war. I don't think this will happen no matter how crazy Putin is. One fundamental reason for its recent military action is to stop Ukraine from joining NATO, to stop NATO from expanding eastward. In a strategic sense, Russia is on the defense.
But he believes Beijing is a different story.
Communist China has a huge economy, and the CCP has ambitions. It wants to surpass the U.S. and is already actively laying out and acting out its plans to do so. The regime wants to export its totalitarian system to the world. In this sense, it's a bigger threat than Russia.
Tang goes on to say if the CCP successfully annexes Taiwan by force, its warship can enter the Pacific Ocean freely and threaten U.S. territories in the Western Pacific. Ballistic missiles from its submarines may be able to strike the U.S. continent. Therefore, Tang stresses that the U.S. needs to figure out the delicate balance between dealing with Russia's threats and avoiding pushing it to Beijing's side. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Australia cancels deals with China over national security concerns. Under new laws, the federal government can now veto international deals that Australian states make if they go against the national interest. NTD's Patrick Hayden reports.
Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison says the country is cancelling 2 Belt and Road infrastructure projects with China.
And the Foreign Relations Act that our government put in place was designed to protect our national interest by ensuring that there were no other agreements entered into by any other level of government that would conflict with Australia's national interest. And so what we've done is we've followed through.
Victoria State agreed to the China projects in 2018 and 2019. States now have to consult the foreign minister before signing agreements with other nations. A US State Department spokesman says Australia is on the front lines of Beijing's coercive diplomacy.
We continue to stand with the people of Australia as they bear the brunt of the PRC's coercive behaviour.
China's foreign ministry spokesperson says Australia should immediately correct mistakes and change course, and not to go further on the wrong path. Australia is also cancelling 2 education agreements with Syria and Iran. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
After years of restoration, the Royal Chapel in the Palace of Versailles is finally ready to welcome visitors again. The chapel reflects the advanced craftsmanship of the 18th century. King Louis XIV personally resided over its construction. NTD's Paris correspondent David Vivez takes us there.
Half away from the earth and the sky, the Royal Chapel in the Palace of Versailles is looking brand new after 4 years of restoration. According to the architect in charge of the restoration, this is a once-in-a-century project in the palace.
We had sculptors working on the building, carpenters, roofers, gilders, stained glass specialists, and the list goes on. We had to extract 10,000 cubic feet from a specific stone quarry, cut the stone, etc.
The restoration required over 10,000 cubic feet of stone from a quarry. Gold on the gilding were also replaced. Mazzi says the most skilled craftsmen were called to work on the project, and when they approached the statues, they were quite surprised.
The details of the statues can't really be seen until you get really close. Our sculptors, when they saw the statues, they thought they were unbelievable, wonderful. They really show the utmost excellence in craftsmanship.
King Louis XIV decided to build the Royal Chapel in the early 18th century and modeled it after the Holy Chapel in Paris. The king's predecessor, St. Louis, built the stained glass Holy Chapel centuries before. He housed inside his collection of patient relics.
Unlike the Holy Chapel, where the stained glass brings a lot of colors, Louis XIV preferred to put mirrors and allowed more light to come in. The king prayed here every day at the Mass. It was a very important place for him and his family.
The Holy Trinity is represented on the ceiling, making it a rare feature in Versailles. Other rooms in the palace display either King Louis XIV himself or Greek divinities. Known as the Sun King, the king's authority was believed to have derived from God.
Louis XIV was on a quest to become a virtuous king. His tutor taught him a lesson when he was young. He said to him, "You should start every day as if you were a true God, and at the end of the day, seek within yourself what you could have done better."
The Royal Chapel followed the design of the Holy Chapel with a hint of modernity and classical Greek-style columns. The architectural design was meant to elevate the human soul to heaven as much as possible. The paintings and the sculptures there also sought to do the same. This was the last building King Louis XIV's designed in his life, and it was meant as a long-lasting legacy for France. The chapel might be able to welcome visitors starting from May 7th. That's when France will begin to lift its lockdown measures. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
That's the news for today, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Stuart Lees.